in the forecast and temperatures around average.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
It's me, Angela Rippon, filling in because Michael has taken the day off. And we have a packed 2 hours, actually still fulfilling Michael's weekly promise of politics, ethics, culture, and good conversation. So we're going to be starting off with a debate about the illegal migration bill, which I'm sure, as many of you will have seen, took a battering this week in the House of Lords. Well, the opposition was mainly led by the Archbishop of Canterbury, and the number of votes that went against the government appears to be something of a record. Well, two members of the House of Lords are going to be joining me to discuss what happened, and we're then going to be looking back at those riots in France, which generated so many headlines. But what is it actually like to live through it? Well, festive and spirited aren't the words you'd normally use to describe it, but that is exactly how one of our guests sees it. He's been holidaying in Marseille throughout some of the worst violence, and he says that far from being scared, actually watching the riots has been fun. Well, back here in the UK, we've got the fallout continuing after Nigel Farage's bank account was closed. I'm going to be joined by Alexandra Tolstoy, who had her account shut by NatWest. Now, she's delved into some of the information that apparently was held on her by private companies, and she was shocked by what she was found. And then, just before 12 o'clock, Stefan Kyriazis was going to be joining us for his weekly roundup of the very best of Theatreland. And a bit later in the show, I do hope you'll stay with me for this, we're going to be discussing the upcoming NATO summit. Should Ukraine become a member of NATO? Also, Charles's so-called second coronation in Scotland. And a legal victory for campaigners at the LGB Alliance. But packed programme, as I say. Before all of that, here are your latest news headlines with Rory Smith.
Thank you very much, Angela. New allegations have emerged about the BBC presenter who allegedly paid a teenager tens of thousands of pounds for explicit images. The young person's mother has told The Sun she saw a photo of the man in his underwear on her child's phone, which looked like it was taken from a video call. Well, to quell speculation, a number of BBC presenters posted messages on social media to say they are not involved in the scandal. MPs are now calling for a full and transparent investigation. The broadcaster says it treats any allegations seriously. Well, former Conservative Party leader Sir Ian Duncan-Smith told Camilla Tominey the situation hasn't been properly handled by the broadcaster.
Yeah, I don't quite know what they're doing. It's in a mess, clearly. If you read the newspaper reports, you can see that the BBC has tried to play this down from the beginning, and it's not worked because it's exploded. They don't have any plan. Any inquiries that are taking place seem to be a mess, and that's led to a whole series of reputational damage across the newspapers to the BBC. The BBC should act like everybody else does, immediately suspend somebody pending the investigation,
yes.
And that way it's clear, and then they can get on with it. At this stage, try and do it quietly and behind the scenes. It never works because somebody's blown the gaff and they're in trouble over it.
More than 1,000 people have crossed the Channel on small boats over the past 2 days. The Home Office says over 600 people were intercepted on Friday and almost 400 made the journey yesterday. Despite storm warnings, conditions are calm, and GBNews understands more than 200 people have already been intercepted just this morning. It brings this year's total to 12,700. Britain is preparing to host the US president, who's due to arrive this evening. Joe Biden will meet the King at Windsor Castle tomorrow. He'll then hold talks with the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, where he is expected to raise concerns over Brexit. America's decision to send cluster munitions to Ukraine could also be discussed. Well, Joe Biden's visit comes ahead of the NATO summit in Lithuania, where the Prime Minister will urge allies to bolster the defence spending. Speaking in Vilnius on Tuesday, Rishi Sunak is expected to say, "We're seeing unprecedented security challenges." The UK remains one of the few NATO members meeting the alliance's requirement to spend at least 2% of national income on defence. The National Crime Agency has seized more than 700 firearms as part of a joint operation with Spain. It led to 74 arrests and 50 convictions. The scheme is targeting guns which are illegal to possess or import to the UK. It's part of a 5-year scheme with Spanish police to also prevent easily convertible guns from entering the country. The Chancellor is set to outline so-called evolutionary pension reforms to boost economic growth. Jeremy Hunt plans to make changes to pension funds, encouraging investors to support fast-growing businesses. Well, in a speech tomorrow, he's expected to say the changes will be gradual, not drastic. The government says the aim is to help savers, pension schemes and the UK. Concerns have been raised about the thousands of displaced Ukrainians who are still in temporary accommodation in Scotland. The Liberal Democrats say more than 3,000 Ukrainians are still in hotels and around 700 are on board the MS Victoria cruise ship. The party says progress has been slow and it criticised the lack of resources, while the government says it's working on longer-term housing. And the Met Office is warning of more heavy showers and thunderstorms later today. It's after rain and storms disrupted major sporting events like Wimbledon and the Ashes yesterday. The Met Office is predicting prolonged heavy rain in Scotland, while Northern Ireland will face strong winds, hail and even potential flooding. Heavy showers are also expected to hit Wales, the Midlands and southwest England. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Angela.
Thanks very much, Rory, for those headlines. Now, they say it's a record. 20 defeats in just over a week for the government's illegal migration bill. Now, the bill was introduced by the Home Secretary in March to reduce the number of small boats that are crossing the English Channel. But it's faced very strong opposition, not least from the Archbishop of Canterbury, who previously called it morally unacceptable. Now, among the amendments that have been handed down from the Lords to the bill that was passed, they've obliged the government to create even more safe and legal routes into the UK for asylum seekers. And indeed, the bill will be back in the Lords again tomorrow with no doubt more amendments. And I'm sure that two of my guests today will be there debating it, because I'm joined on the line by Baroness Claire Fox, who is an independent member of the House of Lords. Here in the studio with me is Lord Daniel Moylan, who is a Conservative peer. And I've also got the writer and broadcaster Matthew Stadlen. Now, I'd like to begin, if I may, Baroness Fox, with you, as you don't have the privilege of being in the studio. It's, I think, fairly clear that the Lords want to destroy this bill. Indeed, I think you are on record as saying that it's a load of old rubbish. So why are you all wasting time playing a kind of political ping-pong with this bill by sending amendments backwards and forwards between the Lords and the Commons? Why don't you just get rid of it and come up with an alternative which will work?
Well, to clarify my position, I have made the point that I think there are serious problems with the bill. I actually voted for one of the amendments that you referred to, only one, which was on the safe routes, to expand those, because indeed that was put forward by a backbench Conservative and was backed across the House. And I have some sympathy with that there are criticisms to be made of the bill. However, I've also made it very clear that the atmosphere in the Lords at the moment is not a serious one of scrutinising and in good faith putting forward amendments. It is to destroy the bill, which I completely disagree with. I think it's incredibly anti-democratic. And in fact, I've spoken a couple of times on the way that the movers of these amendments have basically said, you can't do this, even if the British people want to, because it goes against all of these international conventions that we've signed up to and so on and so forth. They're effectively saying it doesn't matter that the public wants to control borders. It doesn't matter whether the government has come up with this scheme. We're not going to let it pass. And I disagree with that approach. I think you can criticise the bill, which I sometimes will be prepared to do, without being so determined in bad faith to halt it in an unelected chamber like the House of Lords.
But there is so much criticism about it and so much opposition to it. I'd like to ask you, and indeed Lord Moylan, who's with me in the studio, if it is thought to be such a bad piece of legislation, why isn't anybody coming up with an alternative to stop these boats?
Well, I don't know. You have to ask the people who are opposing it what their alternative is. And it would be nice if there was an alternative. It'd be wonderful if there was a magic way of stopping this from happening. But the people of this country are obviously feeling cheesed off that you have all these people coming across who are in some ways cheating the system. They're coming across in boats, and they shouldn't be. And the idea that they could be taken somewhere that is safe, out of this country, might be a way of resolving that. That's what the bill allows. And there are an awful lot of people who are really trying to wreck it. It's hard to see in some ways why they're trying to wreck it if they haven't got an alternative for dealing with it. Some of them actually believe, and I won't say who, but some of them actually, I think, believe that we should just welcome all these people in. We have an obligation that anyone who lands here, we should welcome them in, and that's the end of the story. I don't agree with that. Most people, I think, in this country don't agree with that. Others, again, are very hung up on this idea about international conventions that we've signed up to. Now, the government argues that this bill doesn't actually breach those international conventions, that we're not breaching them. Well, we are perhaps slightly reinterpreting them in some ways, but we're still sort of on the right side of the letter of those conventions. And that's an argument I can't really get involved in because I'm not an international lawyer. But there has to be some solution to this problem, and nobody is coming up with one.
That's the problem, isn't it? No one's coming up with them. Matthew, I'm sure that you will disagree with a lot of what we've just heard. But let me ask you this. We've already spent 140 million. We've given it to Rwanda, and we've actually got nothing back for it at the moment. Would that money be better spent by actually trying to have more people, perhaps in France, the other side of the channel, vetting many of the people that want to come across? And we've got, I think it's, 160,000 people in this country already who are waiting for some kind of decision. And there is, I think, the possibility that within those people, many of them have got skills that we could use. Nurses, doctors, lawyers, engineers, people prepared to work for a living in this country. Is that where you think the money should be spent?
Well, we've got people rotting away, haven't we, on the sort of waiting list, waiting for their cases to be processed by, in my view, an incompetent government. These people could be contributing really valuably to our society. Do I want people to come here illegally to cheat the system? No. Do I want there to be safe routes where they can be properly and efficiently processed? Yes. I mean, what Daniel says, what Lord Moylan said just then, implies, I think, that the Rwanda bill, even if it gets through in the end, will work. We've got no evidence whatsoever that it will work. Let's step back just for a moment and look at the big picture. This is Rishi Sunak and Suella Braverman's flagship policy. This has to work for them. Otherwise, they are completely doomed at the next general election. And it is failing at every obstacle. It is being knocked about, bashed about in the House of Lords, whatever you think about the rights and wrongs of having an unelected second chamber. That's what's happening. It has been found to be unlawful by a majority verdict, not unanimously, in the Court of Appeal by 2-1. The Lord Chief Justice actually, his decision was in favour of the government, but he had to read out the others because that was his role, and it was turned down in the Court of Appeal. It may win in the Supreme Court, we don't know. What I'm trying to get across here is that this is grotesque incompetence. Rwanda was never a serious solution to this problem, and it is a problem.
And it's an international problem. Isn't that the problem, Baroness Fox? It is an international problem, isn't it? And nobody seems to be coming up with anything. The Labour Party, I think, have come up with 5 points, a 5-point plan, which basically boils down to just having greater planning and cooperation with the French. Well, Sunak has already tried that, and that hasn't really worked. So, you know, where are we going to go with this? Because there are so many people who still like the Archbishop of Canterbury feel that this is an immoral way to deal with people who might have a very genuine reason for wanting to escape their countries and come to here for a new life.
But I think that's the problem, that we're not having this conversation in good faith. When the Archbishop of Canterbury and the Lord spoke, and I was there when he made his point, you always get the impression that the moral people are the ones who are opposed to this bill. The immoral people, the immoral people are anyone who tries to have a practical solution. And I think that that has coloured the discussion, because instead of being able to really address the problem, you almost feel as though you're being gaslit. You know, when I've raised in the past in problems about the way refugee status is almost assumed as the default position for people, when in fact many of them, even if you can understand why they do it, just want a better life, and that's why they come here. The assumption is that everyone who applies is coming in good faith, that they're obviously fleeing war and terror, and we know that that is not true. So the public feels so frustrated that they're being told by parliamentarians you can't do anything. And one thing I'd like to query that Lord Moylan said is that the government try and say this fits in with international conventions. I would suggest that a lot of those international conventions are not fit for purpose. Everybody cites the 1951 Refugee Convention, but that was in very different circumstances drawn up today. So one of the reasons, and where we know people were fleeing Nazism, where people were fleeing, the horrors of Stalinism or what have you, now we're in a situation where there's so many bases on which you can say, I am a refugee. The amendments in the Lords have made it even wider. It's escaping LGBTQ plus persecution. That is one of the amendments that got passed. That means half the world is going to arrive.
Daniel.
We've got to recognise that what's going on here is that there is a huge international business involved, a huge criminal travel agency.
And isn't the question then how you stop that?
That people pay money or sell themselves into bondage in order to get to travel from one side of the world to the other, one side of Europe to the other, in order to come to England. And we have to find a way of disrupting their business model to stop them from making money. So if you know that paying your £3,000 or £4,000 or whatever it is to get on one of those boats is going to result in you being taken off the beach and rapidly taken somewhere else, and the bill doesn't actually mention Rwanda, it's two separate issues, in fact, to some other safe place, then you'll think twice about paying that money to them.
But it's not working.
The idea.
It
hasn't happened yet.
To my mind, the key thing for the government, whether it's the Tory government now or a Labour government in the future, is to develop the best possible relations with our European neighbours post-Brexit. We have to be working at a micro and a macro level with Macron, with the French government, and saying, you guys have to do better. You have to police your shores better than you're doing at the moment. Let me just quickly say, because I think it's really important, some of the amendments in the Lords, what are they voting about? They are voting to ensure that the limit on unaccompanied children remains at 24 hours of detention. Can you imagine an unaccompanied child getting to this country through no fault of their own? Whatever you think of people coming here more generally, they can't be detained for longer than 24 hours. Pregnant women. The Lords have voted to make sure in this amendment that pregnant women are not detained for longer than 72 hours. This is basic humanity. And whether or not, as I say, you agree with an unelected second chamber, surely they've got this right.
Why are unaccompanied children, genuine unaccompanied children, on these boats in the first place? That's the first question. And the second point is, as you know, there are people, I don't know how many, it might be few, who turn up claiming to be children. It's very hard to prove. And, of course, they're in fact adults. Yeah. So this whole system is full of abuse and trickery, and you have to box people.
I'm going to stop you both, unfortunately, because we are running out of time. You'll have much more time to discuss this in the Lords as from tomorrow. Matthew, thank you very much indeed. And Baroness Fox, also thank you all for joining us. I've got you. I wonder what you made of Stop Oil's latest stunt. But thank you both very much indeed for joining us in the studio, and Baroness Fox for being down the line with us today. Thank you very much indeed. Now, if you haven't seen it at home, the eco-activists showed up uninvited at the wedding of the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, George Osborne, and his partner. Theo Rogers, just take a look at what happened next. Well, you expect confetti at a wedding, but that was orange, and that was clearly the trademark of Stop Oil. Matthew, what did you make of that?
So I'm someone who does think there is a climate crisis that we're facing, because I listen to and watch the science, I read up about it. But I have to say that really was disgusting. Yes, it was only confetti, but this is a private wedding. It's the most special day in most people's lives. To do that, I mean, you don't use this word very often, but the first word that came to my mind when I saw it on social media was disgusting.
Well,
Daniel?
you just have to look at her in her lovely costume and her hair and the glee, the mad glee on her face. And the only conclusion you can reach is that there are elements of the middle classes in the United Kingdom who have gone completely bonkers.
What does it achieve?
It achieves, well, I know what it achieves. It actually achieves more sympathy for George Osborne than he's ever had for a long time, probably.
But it does achieve. It definitely does achieve publicity for the fact that we have to face facts, and we are facing a climate crisis.
I think it puts people off. I think it puts people off. They think they're totally bonkers, which they are.
Now, you two are going to have to finish this in the green room because I'm afraid I have to bring it to a halt. But thank you both very much indeed, Daniel and Matthew, and indeed Claire Fox, who was on the other end of the line. Thank you both very much indeed. Now, you're watching Angela Rippon on GB News. After the break, is it tactless to describe a riot as fun? Well, that's what one of our next guests says after spending his holiday in Marseille watching the French in revolt.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. Well, it's another day of sunshine and showers across the country today. Some of them will be heavy at times and a little fresher for everyone. Looking at the bigger picture, low pressure still sits to the west of the UK, drawing in these showers and longer spells of rain over the next few days. In fact, some of this rain will be heavy at times and turning quite persistent for some on Monday. For the rest of Sunday, plenty of sunny spells, more in the way of sunshine compared to Saturday, though there will be some heavy showers. Thundery across Northern Ireland, Wales, the Midlands down into southwest England, so there could be some local disruption with a Met Office warning in force. Elsewhere drier, temperatures generally in the low 20s, perhaps locally around 24 or 25 across southeast England this afternoon. Those thundery showers continue to push northwards as we head through the evening, but then fade away by the end of the day, and then overnight it's generally dry with clear spells across much of the country, but then towards the end of the night we just start to see a few showers pushing in from the southwest as that low pressure system starts to edge nearer. Temperatures generally around the mid-teens, so still quite warm for the time of year. Plenty of sunshine first thing Monday morning, but the clouds gather from the southwest. Areas of rain start to move in, so parts of Wales will see some heavy downpours developing. Elsewhere during the afternoon on Monday, it's a case of sunny spells and scattered showers. Temperatures similar once more, generally reaching the low 20s for most, perhaps 24, 25 degrees across southeast England. Into the evening time on Monday, further pulses of rain continue to push northwards. Another area pushing into southwest England through towards the end of the day, which could be heavy at times. Still, the odd rumble of thunder is possible too. And going forward, further showers and longer spells of rain is in the forecast and temperatures around average.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Welcome back. Now, many of us over the last few days have been shocked by the pictures emerging from France as cities were overtaken by destruction and rioting. What is it like for those who are actually caught in the middle of something like that? And indeed, does the picture painted by the media really capture the reality of what it's like to be in a city in revolt? Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now by Charlotte Dubensky, who is a journalist in Paris for many, many years and covered probably more riots than she'd care to remember, and Igor Torioni-Lalich. He's the arts editor of The Spectator magazine, and he's been on a blissful holiday to Marseille, and it was made, by the sound of it, even, according to him, more fun by serious rioting that was going on around him. Welcome to both of you. Igor, first of all, I mean, we've seen cars on fire, buildings being attacked. We've seen the riot police are out in full riot chaos, and yet you've described it as fun, and actually I think that it was choreographed. What brought you to that conclusion?
I'm not saying it's pre-planned or anything like that. I'm just saying, I mean, two things with the holiday in a riot. One, you feel absolutely safe as houses. I mean, because there's this performance going on between the cops and the ruffians, they don't care about you. You can walk and wander wherever you want. The second thing is, you can get a table anywhere. All the great restaurants in Marseille, of which there are many, were completely empty, especially on the Saturday night, as everyone sort of took fright. But actually, you could walk around the city perfectly fine, and there'd be a few streets with a bit of running about, which was kind of a pretty new texture to the city. And then you can go off and have dinner. And usually you had great vantage points where you could see the cops and the boys chasing each other across the city. It was very safe, very fun, and can't wait for it to sort of happen again. Really, I mean, it was ideal.
Well, Charlotte, I'm not sure whether you would agree with that or not, because you have covered, as we say, so many riots in your professional career. Do you find that it's fun? I mean, do you feel that this is something that's become a sort of spectator sport in France, because it's happened in not just in Paris, but in cities all over the country?
I think describing it as fun is an interesting way of looking at it. Certainly if you're a tourist and you're happy to go out, you can profit from the fact that the restaurants may be more empty as a result of it. But having been a journalist, covered riots and been in the middle of that, I've also seen how easy it is for tourists to get caught up in the tear gas, and being caught up in tear gas is no laughing matter. And not just that, but the problems are that when you end up wandering into the areas where there are riots taking place, and let's be clear, these riots are quite specific in the areas, this isn't the whole city that's on fire, you do have the problems then of being able to get out. Often the French police will cordon off the areas and they will not let you out. Even as a journalist, on the night of Macron's election back in 2017, I was kettled into an area for several hours, and despite showing my press accreditation, they wouldn't let me out. There was no chance that they were letting anybody else out, regardless of who they were. These riots are sporadic, they're dangerous. As a tourist, I would say most tourism areas generally are unaffected, but that's not all, and we saw that with the calls for the riots to take place on the Champs-Elysees on the last night, Saturday last week. Of course, then we see a huge police presence as they're trying to crack down on it. But as a tourist, yes, you can profit, you can say, oh, this is not our country, and you can perhaps laugh about it. But these are really dangerous situations, and I wouldn't recommend anybody try and get themselves involved at all.
Very briefly, Charlotte, have you ever felt threatened or in danger in these situations? Or frightened?
Always. These situations can spark up very quickly. For the most part, you'll go to a riot or a protest and it will feel very calm in the early hours. As the night descends, then you'll start seeing some cat and mouse games between the police, between the protesters. And this is normally a very small number of protesters who've come out to make trouble. That's what they're there to do. There is a group called the Black Blocs here in France, and they target certain areas. So they'll decide if it's a normal protest, which is to protest, say, about the pension reform here in France. These are protests where people want to talk about the real issue, and you'll have individuals who come in and take over that and target banks or shops like McDonald's and restaurants. And that is what's problematic, is that this can turn in a second. And as soon as you have the protesters either smashing things up or throwing anything from Molotov cocktails to rocks that they found on the street to the police then react very quickly. And I've been in situations where in seconds it turns around.
Well, in view of that, Igor, you're still in Marseille, I understand, on holiday. Do you still feel safe there?
Oh, completely. I felt absolutely safe during the riots themselves, and I was right in the middle of them. I think everything that Charlotte is saying, the journalist is saying, is may be true in some riots, but it's not true in the riot that I witnessed with my own eyes. The tear gas is actually very good. It cleared my cold, actually. They should bottle it and sell it in Boots. It's fantastic. No, I mean, it was really fantastic. It was festive. I mean, Marseille is basically very spirited. And this is what happens in a city. Cities erupt, and they deserve to erupt. They need to erupt because things get hot and things get,
I'm sure not everybody would agree with you, Igor, but it's good to know that currently you are safe and you're still enjoying your holiday. And Charlotte, thank you very much indeed also for joining us. Thank you both so much. Yes, I must admit, I've been in the middle of a riot occasionally. I've never thought of it as fun either. Now, when Nigel Farage revealed that his bank account had been abruptly closed and he'd been refused an account by several other banks, he drew attention to an issue that has affected quite a number of people throughout the UK, apparently. And one of them has joined me in the studio now. She's Alexandra Tolstoy, a single mother of 3 who runs an adventure travel company. Now, her account with NatWest was shut with 2 months' notice, and she still hasn't got all of her money from that account back, and she's still not had a full explanation from the bank of why that decision was made. And Alexandra joins me in the studio now. Alexandra, I've read all of the correspondence that you've had, not only with the bank, but also with another company as well, with a company that was apparently doing the research into you. It struck me that it was not only just a bit frightening, but also quite sinister. How have you coped? How have you coped not having a bank account and at some point not having any money?
Yeah, I feel like it's a sort of Orwellian nightmare because it is equivalent to being in the Soviet Union. I was accused of something which carries a very, very heavy sentence with it.
We should say that that's being accused of being a politically exposed person.
Yeah, so
and the banks are worried about that because
but the bank didn't tell me that.
No, but a bank. Yeah. But when they call you a PEP, it means that they're afraid that you may be subject to money laundering, or that indeed you could be subject to bribery.
Exactly. So for me, the bank refused to give me. They wrote this awful thing. We will not even speak to you, and I was terrified. I'm on my own. I didn't sleep. I just hysterical because you cannot operate. We live in a digital world. You cannot operate without a bank account. I was trying to think. My cousin was saying you can use my account. I can't because that really would be money laundering. I've managed to open an online account, but I'm very scared because what I've discovered is that the same data company provides data to all banks. And I fought and fought and fought. And then, funnily enough, when I'd done my first bit of publicity, one of the data companies I'd applied to, you can apply for an access request, suddenly responded. And this, to me, was shocking. Their results are based on 3 Daily Mail articles and 1 Russian article. I live in Monaco, and I'm married to the father of my children.
Who is Russian?
Who is Russian. Not sanctioned, by the way, but both of them, I wrote back immediately, I went, this is insane. You can check the electoral roll, you can check my HMRC.
You don't live in Monaco, you live in London.
I live in Wandsworth. I have visited Monaco maybe 3 times. I never lived there, never been written that I lived there, just that I'd been there. And it's extremely public information that the father of my children left the UK in 2015. He's never sent me a payment. And NatWest and I wrote to the data company and I said, this is completely untrue. And they said, OK, fine, we'll remove it. And I said, you can so likely literally destroy my life. And 5 million other people, by the way. There are 5 million people on this World Check data list who don't know anything about it. I was lucky that through the sort of through the media, I was able to get access, I feel. I think they would have ignored me otherwise. And I've been able to write it, but to so lightly and casually, with the most flimsy of, my children could research better than that.
Yeah, I mean, we should say, immediately I say the name Tolstoy, immediately people will remember that, of course, one of your ancestors wrote War and Peace, that Nikolai Tolstoy, who's your father, isn't he? He is someone who is a historian and also has worked in politics. And the father of your 3 children is Sergei Pugachev, who is a very close friend of Putin.
Well, very publicly that he's
very
not.
publicly.
No, but he's not a friend.
But also an oligarch, said to be an oligarch. That with all of that kind of background, were you surprised that they actually took all of that kind of information and used it against you?
Yes, I was, because I've had an account with NatWest since 2016, which is after Sergei left the UK. I have said to the bank, go through my transactions, prove to me that Sergei has not made one payment for maintenance of our children. Never, never, never. And they can't find, there's no transaction they could find. So all my transactions are completely transparent. I run my work through 2 companies on Companies House. I pay my taxes, I use an accountant. It is totally transparent, but they didn't bother. And I wrote, you know, I said, I have 3 children who 100% depend on me. You're really, really impacting on a lot of lives here. And they just said, we don't care, we won't discuss it.
Yeah.
And then said, we'll send you a cheque in the post with your remaining money with us.
Which is £12,000, as I understand
yes,
it.
and it maybe in 60 days. And I said, well, what if I don't have a new bank account? How do I cash this cheque? What do I do?
But you have got a new bank account.
Well, I have got this online.
So what has happened now?
So now I have this online account, but I live in absolute fear that I will get a letter through the door saying, you can't bank with us. And then what do you do in this day and age? And I mean, I'm smiling about it now, but I have cried, you know, really, really anxious. I wouldn't be able to run my business. How do I bring up my children? And
as I understand it, the government needs to make an intervention here. What chance do you think there is of people like you and others like you, as you say, 5,000 on a similar register?
5 million.
5 million?
5 million.
On a similar register.
So it's this horrific company called World Check, and they have this partisan called Refinitiv, who, you know, accumulate data. And honestly, my 14-year-old son could do a far better job. They don't look at HMRC records. They don't look at the electoral roll. They don't look at any official court documents. They just Google and put together something.
What would you like the government to do to actually protect people like you and the 5 million others that you say are on this
list?
list?
I think World Check should immediately have a massive fine. I want to sue for compensation. It's ruined my life for many months now. And I think that they should be heavily checked. You can't just accumulate. You know, it's like saying, oh, you committed murder, but I'm going to provide no evidence, and the evidence I do provide is just something I read on the internet. I mean, that's...
But this is a company that was supposedly looking into your background. As I understand it, the bank themselves say they followed the rules. They've absolutely no necessary to explain why we have got rid of you. And on this basis, we will not meet or talk with you.
So arrogant.
So, I mean, was that the first indication you had that actually you were on your own in this?
Yes, and I only got that far because some person kindly advised me to write to the CEO, this woman, Alison Rose. Otherwise, I was trying to... You know, I had a manager before they threw me out who was always calling me saying, oh, do you want to buy this? Do you want to put your money in here? The moment I got the letter, I called her, I emailed her, I texted her. She just refused to answer my calls. So you feel it's absolutely terrifying. And there are a lot of people out there who are not as lucky as me and can't speak in public. It is just terrifying.
So what advice would you give to people who find themselves in a similar position? I mean, Nigel Farage is one. There are many others now that are becoming public, and indeed yourself.
I would advise them to do this data access request, which everybody has the legal right to do. It's just a formulaic document which you can send to the bank, to all these data companies. And as I have proved, you get this data, and most of it's... Well, mine was all false. I just said, that's false, and they said, OK, fine, we'll delete it.
So, in other words, if you're able to track down information that is incorrect about you, you can have it removed and changed?
Yes, but the crazy thing was, in the same absolutely light, casual way they slandered me, in the same absolutely easy way, they removed it. I mean...
Do you feel safe now or not?
No, I don't feel safe, and I do feel... I feel terrified, because my children are so dependent on me, and how do I... You know, and I feel my work is going abroad, and when I was abroad, I was so frightened because my money was just sitting in NatWest, and they closed my... I didn't know what to do because I couldn't contact them or...
So what will you do if even the next bank that you go to and the one that you are with at the moment online suddenly says you are a PEP?
So what I'm doing now is I've been advised by a lawyer. Some incredibly kind people have popped out of the woodwork and helped me for free. A lawyer told me, you go, and now I have to go. It's a lot of work to every single data company, send this request in, cancel all the rubbish that they've got on me. But it's a lot of work, and I don't know, maybe the data company in 1 year will suddenly amend their record or change things. But I hope, I mean, I would like to support all these people trying to change the law. They shouldn't use these data companies. They should be using proper researchers. And, of course, if someone's money laundering, they shouldn't. But, you know, there's no way that I am money laundering.
But basically what you're saying is that the bank made a decision on you and your account without actually double-checking
Yes.
whether or not the information they were given was accurate.
Exactly. So they sent letters to my address in London, but they believed I lived in Monaco, and they said that my spouse was the father of my
To
children.
whom you were never married.
And they could have just tracked... It's so easy to track my incoming payments. Not one of them ever came from him or any company, any foreign company or anything.
Alexandra, thank you very much indeed for sharing your story with us. As you say, if there are 5 million people out there who are in the same position...
We all need to fight.
Thank you for the advice that you've passed on.
Thank you.
Don't go anywhere, because Stefan Kyriazis is going to be with me after the break to tell us what fabulous shows he's been seeing this week in the theatre. Welcome back. Well, Stefan Kyriazis has made himself very comfortable on the settee opposite me. He's had a very full week in the theatre this week. And, Stefan, I believe you want to talk about something which actually you haven't seen yet.
No.
It's only just been announced.
Yeah, but I just think it's a really, really lovely story. They've just announced they're going to be making a play called Backstairs Billy, which is about the true story of William Talon, who was famously the Queen Mother's page of the backstairs, hence Backstage Billy. There's this wonderful story from years ago that the Queen Mother once rang down and said...
Yes. No.
I don't know what you two old queens are doing down there, but this old queen is thirsty. Now, it's very likely this was probably Billy and his partner Reginald, his partner was the page of the presents.
Yes.
So he was the one serving drinks and food to him. And they were together for 30 years. And the story is going to be set in 1979, which is the year after both of them were appointed to her household formally. It's starring Luke Evans, Hollywood star, the gorgeous Penelope Wilton.
She's playing the Queen Mother.
She's playing the Queen Mother, directed by Michael Grandage. It's a new playwright, Marcelo dos Santos. It's Duke of York Theatre from November. And I just think it's a gorgeous, glorious story.
And it is a comedy, isn't it?
It's based on, they've just said, important events of 1979. So I'm imagining there's going to be a lot of humour and a lot of heart, and just a little sneak peek into backstairs of the royal family. I love the idea.
That story about the Queen Mother has been doing the rounds for years. I love it. But now, look, come on. You've seen two shows that I've actually seen over the last 10 days. Let's talk, first of all, about Crazy for You.
Crazy for You is glorious, sublime, bliss. Everybody, please go and see it. It's on at the Gillian Lynn Theatre in Covent Garden. It's based on the music of George and Ira Gershwin.
Yes.
It's based loosely on Girl Crazy, but they've got the estate's permission to mix in all the other music, and it is filled with the most sublime music and dancing. I think the final...
Charlie is the lead, isn't he?
Charlie Stemp.
Yes.
Extraordinary.
What a dancer. I mean, he does tournons around the stage. I mean, that would do justice to Baryshnikov.
Yeah.
I mean,
Charisma.
amazing stuff.
Charisma, he's kind of like the new Michael Crawford, with a little bit of Lee Evans mixed in. The end of Act 1 is I Got Rhythm, and of course the big refrain is who could ask for anything more? Could you? I couldn't. I was like, no, this is absolute heaven, and it's like a bolt of sunbeam, sunshine, joy.
I tell you what I loved about it. It's a musical comedy. So you know, most of the musicals that we see these days tend to be really kind of very serious stuff, but you laugh through it.
So funny.
And the thing I did love, as you say, it's the music of the Gershwin. So you come out. Because you know the tunes, you come out with a big smile on your face and you are humming the tunes.
And tapping away. I'm sure you could have danced. No one wants to see me dance, but maybe you. But yeah, it's absolute joy, and I encourage everybody, please go and see this show.
Now, everybody in the country should go and see 42nd Street, which was at the Sadler's Wells, but it's just started a nationwide tour. And that is one where, really, I wish I did have my tap shoes with me, because that was just sensational, I thought.
Well, that one, again, the big refrain is, come on and meet those dancing feet. And boy, those dancing feet. I mean, it had lots of kind of big names. London had Ruthie Henshaw and people like that in it. But it's all about the ensemble. This show is about the team, the ensemble, the backing group. And they are sublime. And it's absolute heaven. Huge fun again. It's just joyous. And that's, you know, we need this.
Oh, and brilliant tap dancing. Bill Deemer, I think, was the choreographer. Fantastic tap on that. And I think, do you know what is lovely is for us to be able to talk about a show that was so brilliant in the West End, but is now, or in fact, it was at Sadler's Wells rather than in the West End, but it's now going on tour, which means we're not talking about a show that people have got to come to London to see. You can see it in Plymouth, in Newcastle, in Liverpool, in Bath, in all sorts of places. And that is wonderful, I think, when a tour like that goes out into the country as a whole.
World class.
That are desperate for really brilliant musicals.
I agree.
Now, Wizard of Oz. Quite a different reaction to this one.
It's had quite a mixed one. So this is obviously based on the famous film, but 2011 production created by Andrew Lloyd Webber. So there's some new Lloyd Webber numbers in there, and you can definitely see the joins. His music is very different and swelling and luscious and fine. It's, again, this originated out of London, this production, so it's Leicester Curve, another exciting theatre. Chichester Theatre were the ones that created This Crazy for You, and Leicester Curve have created Wizard of Oz. So it's these powerhouse regional theatres as well, creating these big pieces that often move into London. This is on at the Palladium, but then will go on a huge national tour from December, starting off in Liverpool for Christmas season. And they've taken a very 1950s steampunk kind of view to it, which is set kind of in the period. So you've got Glinda and the Good Witch both on motorbikes. The Wicked Witch's wand is actually an exhaust pipe. She's got all this industrial lands and everything. It's fun. There's so much energy. The orchestrations are wonderful. Big names, Ashley Banjo as the Tin Man, Jason Manford as the Cowardly Lion. All huge fun. Little bit too much going on, but I think it just needs to just relax a bit. But let me tell you, the kids in the audience, one little boy in particular, the kids were loving it. This is a family show, which we also need a lot of. There was one little boy that was shouting at the Wicked Witch the whole time, and that was glorious. And I was thinking, OK, you know, maybe different for adults, but for children, this is heaven for them. It's fun, so I thoroughly recommend it for families.
Yeah, the only thing that I saw in some of the reviews that came out, I don't know what you think about this, but the feeling was that in a way it was almost too much technical stuff going on.
Yeah.
It sort of overwhelmed the audience. But the comment that I loved from one of the critics was that actually for him, the real star of the show was Toto, the dog, which is a puppet. It's not even a human.
It's so super. I mean, puppetry these days has come on a long way.
From the War Horse.
We've had War Horse and Life of Pi winning all the awards for that as well. So yes, it's that wonderful thing where the man is standing there the whole time, operating the puppet, kind of in Dorothy's arms or around and everything. It's glorious, and yes, I agree. We kind of awed and sighed and giggled at Toto. It's beautifully done. So yes, I would agree. The little bit of the star of the show is Toto.
What does that say about the rest of the cast?
It's a lot of fun. It just needs. I think they just need to sort of
calm it down a bit.
They need to bed in a little bit and trust the material.
Yeah.
But there's a lot going on. But also, you get a lot for your money, which is important these days.
Yeah. And very briefly, Strange Loop.
Yes.
This is a new play.
Yes, and I want to talk about that just because it's so different. We've got all these classic historical pieces, very sort of legacy musical theatre. A Strange Loop won the Pulitzer Prize for writing. Yeah. It won lots of Tony Awards. It's very, very kind of zeitgeisty. It's written by a self-professed, big, fat, black, queer man, and the lead character is the same and professed the same. And it's
about a big, fat, queer
black man
writing a play about a big, fat, queer man, hence the loop.
Loops. It loops and loops and loops. But it's also a massive examination of the loops we have in our own brains, about self-identity, about self-repression. It's about what communities like the gay community or the black community actually do to their own members. If you're oppressed, you tend to push down on those around you. So it's about all those battles. But it's also anyone that feels unloved, unseen, alone, questioning themselves, and it's piercingly beautiful in places. Yeah. So I think it's an important piece, and I think when we have all this other wonderful stuff going on, I think it's very valid, and we need voices like this as well, for choice, for variety, and also representation. So, and for people that don't always see themselves seen and heard and represented on stage. So for me, I'm very glad I saw it, and I'm glad it's there.
So something for everybody if you want to
go to the theatre.
Yes, do go to, especially after 2 years of not being able to go. It is wonderful to see everything coming back on stage, and so much going on out in regional theatre as well, with productions being originated out in the regions and then going out in the regions with really top quality performers and top quality productions.
Yes.
Oh, I wish I'd taken my tap shoes with me to 42nd Street, I really do. But thanks very much indeed for that, Stefan. Well, that's it for this hour, but we will, of course, have lots more for you at 12 o'clock, including former Foreign Secretary Lord David Owen, just as Joe Biden touches down in the UK before heading off to the NATO summit in Lithuania. Lots more coming up in the next half hour of the programme, so I hope that you will be able to stay with me. See you in a minute.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. Well, it's another day of sunshine and showers across the country today. Some of them will be heavy at times and a little fresher for everyone. Looking at the bigger picture, low pressure still sits to the west of the UK, drawing in these showers and longer spells of rain over the next few days. In fact, some of this rain will be heavy at times and turning quite persistent for some on Monday. For the rest of Sunday, plenty of sunny spells, more in the way of sunshine compared to Saturday, though there will be some heavy showers. Thundery across Northern Ireland, Wales, the Midlands down into southwest England, so there could be some local disruption with a Met Office warning in force. Elsewhere, drier, temperatures generally in the low 20s, perhaps locally around 24 or 25 across southeast England this afternoon. Those thundery showers continue to push northwards as we head through the evening, but then fade away by the end of the day, and then overnight it's generally dry with clear spells across much of the country, but then towards the end of the night we just start to see a few showers pushing in from the southwest as that low pressure system starts to edge nearer. Temperatures generally around the mid-teens, so still quite warm for the time of year. plenty of sunshine first thing Monday morning, but the clouds gather from the southwest. Areas of rain start to move in, so parts of Wales will see some heavy downpours developing. Elsewhere during the afternoon on Monday, it's a case of sunny spells and scattered showers. Temperatures similar once more, generally reaching the low 20s for most, perhaps 24, 25 degrees across southeast England. Into the evening time on Monday, further pulses of rain continue to push northwards. Another area pushing into southwest England through towards the end of the day, which could be heavy at times. Still, the odd rumble of thunder is possible too. And going forward, further showers and longer spells of rain is in the forecast, and temperatures around average.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
And welcome back to This Week, Sunday with me, Angela Rippon, sitting in while Michael Portillo takes a well-earned day off. Now, Joe Biden is going to be touching down on British soil very, very soon, and he's going to go on to meet the King and indeed the Prime Minister before he then goes on to the NATO summit. Now, that summit is taking place in Lithuania, right on the Belarusian border. But can we expect it to agree a pathway for Ukraine to join the NATO alliance? We'll have former Foreign Secretary Lord Owen to give his views. Speaking of the King, by the way, he's had an eventful week, hasn't he? Something of a second coronation, no less. In Edinburgh, Charles was presented with the crown jewels of Scotland. But outside, there were hundreds of anti-monarchy protesters who made their voices heard. Well, David Starkey, the historian, is going to be joining me to explain what the ceremony was really all about. And I'm sure lots of you will be tuned into Wimbledon over the next week. Well, as it's well underway, young people up and down the country apparently are pestering their parents for tennis rackets. That's because interest in tennis always surges at this time every year. But how do we keep that interest alive once that particular tournament is over? I'm going to be joined by an award-winning tennis coach called Zach Evenden, who will tell me how we can manage to produce a few more British tennis players of world-class standard. And later in the show, we'll have the two co-founders of the LGB Alliance, the gay rights group who this week won a legal victory when a case to remove their charitable status was thrown out of court. But before all of that, let's get the latest news headlines with Rory Smith.
Thank you very much, Angela. New allegations have emerged about the BBC presenter who allegedly paid a teenager tens of thousands of pounds for explicit images. The young person's mother has told The Sun she saw a photo of the man in his underwear on her child's phone, which looked like it was taken from a video call. To quell speculation, a number of BBC presenters posted messages on social media to say they are not involved in the scandal. MPs are now calling for a full and transparent investigation. The broadcaster says it treats any allegation seriously, while former Conservative Party leader Sir Ian Duncan-Smith says the situation has not been properly handled by the BBC.
Yeah, I don't quite know what they're doing. It's in a mess, clearly. If you read the newspaper reports, you can see that the BBC has tried to play this down from the beginning, and it's not worked because it's exploded. They don't have any plan. Any inquiries that are taking place seem to be a mess, and that's led to a whole series of reputational damage across the newspapers to the BBC. The BBC should act like everybody else does, immediately suspend somebody pending the investigation,
yes.
And that way it's clear, and then they can get on with it. At this stage, try and do it quietly and behind the scenes. It never works because somebody's blown the gaff and they're in trouble over it.
More than 1,000 people have crossed the Channel on small boats over the past 2 days. The Home Office says over 600 people were intercepted on Friday and almost 400 made the journey yesterday. Despite storm warnings, conditions are calm, and GBNews understands that more than 200 people have already been intercepted just this morning. It brings the total this year to 12,700. Britain is preparing to host the US president, who's due to arrive this evening. Joe Biden will meet the King at Windsor Castle tomorrow. Then he'll hold talks with the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, where he is expected to raise concerns over Brexit. America's decision to send cluster munitions to Ukraine could also be discussed. Well, Joe Biden's visit comes ahead of the NATO summit in Lithuania, where the Prime Minister will urge allies to bolster their defence spending. Speaking in Vilnius on Tuesday, Rishi Sunak is expected to say that we're seeing unprecedented security challenges. The UK remains one of the few NATO members meeting the alliance's requirement to spend at least 2% of national income on defence. More than 700 firearms have been seized in the UK by the National Crime Agency. Forces have been working with police in Spain to stop guns, which can easily be converted, from entering the UK. In 11 cases, firearms were sent to people with mental health issues, and 7 involved people with extremist views. The NCA says 74 people have been arrested, resulting in 50 convictions over the past 5 years. The Chancellor is set to outline so-called evolutionary pension reforms to boost economic growth. Jeremy Hunt plans to make changes to pension funds, encouraging investors to support fast-growing businesses. Well, in a speech tomorrow, he's expected to say the changes will be gradual, not drastic. The government says the aim is to help savers, pension schemes and the UK. Almost half of state schools in Scotland have not been inspected in a decade. Figures obtained by the Scottish Conservatives show only 57% of state schools and 54% of independent schools have been inspected since 2012. The party says the situation is completely unacceptable and is calling on the government to ensure regular inspections. But the Scottish Government says the schools are inspected on a proportionate basis. Concerns have been raised about the thousands of displaced Ukrainians who are still in temporary accommodation in Scotland. The Liberal Democrats say more than 3,000 Ukrainians are still in hotels and around 700 are on board the MS Victoria cruise ship. The party says progress has been slow and it criticised the lack of resources. The government says it's working on longer-term housing. And the Met Office is warning of more heavy showers and thunderstorms later. It's after rain and storms disrupted major sporting events like Wimbledon and the Ashes yesterday. The Met Office is predicting prolonged heavy rain in Scotland, while Northern Ireland will face strong winds, hail and even potential flooding. Heavy showers are also expected to hit Wales, the Midlands and South West England. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Angela.
And thank you, Rory, for that summary of the news. Now, on Tuesday of the coming week, NATO leaders are going to get together in Vilnius to discuss the future of the NATO alliance. The Lithuanian capital sits just a few miles from the border of Russia's ally, Belarus, and 1,000 troops have been sent to protect the summit. Now, there's one major question on everyone's lips as part of the schedule for that, which is whether or not they should offer NATO membership to Ukraine. It's a motion that really has had an awful lot of support. And to give us their perspective, I'm joined now by Tobias Ellwood, who is chair of the Defence Select Committee, and I'm hoping that Lord David Owen, who is former Foreign Secretary, is also going to be able to join us, but we're just trying to get him up on the line at the moment. But Tobias, as I've got you, let me just put this to you. President Biden has already said that he's not going to make it easy for the Ukraine to join, and his national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, says that Ukraine will not be joining NATO coming out of this summit. It sort of put the kibosh on that discussion before they've even started, hasn't it?
I think well, good afternoon. He's put it in perspective as to the perhaps difficult road that Ukraine will have to take. Look where we are with Sweden. I mean, this is going to be a challenging summit, so much on the agenda. We're trying to get Sweden across the line. And because of the consensus-driven structure of NATO, there's simply no chance of Ukraine being able to join anytime soon. I think what Ukraine would like to see is some assurances, security assurances that once, hopefully, this war on the mainland is over, that we're not going to simply allow the space for Russia to step back, regroup, and do this all over again in a couple of years' time. That is the concern that Ukraine has. And that's the sort of commitments that NATO could indeed consider. But ultimately, in the same way as joining the EU, there's an awful lot of caveats that need to be done to provide greater transparency and openness if Ukraine is to join in the longer term. But ultimately, this is the largest war in Europe since the Second World War, and we need to do more to put this fire out and make sure it stays out. And NATO has a huge role to play there.
Well, presumably what they could do is offer what I think is referred to as a formal invitation to at least make it clear that they have the expectation that the Ukraine will eventually join NATO.
Yes, I mean, that is absolutely, I think, the sort of guarantees they want. There's also another organization called the Joint Expeditionary Force. This is NATO light, if you like. 10 like-minded nations that work together. It was set up by Britain to look after the High North, I would strongly recommend that both Ukraine and indeed Poland were to join this. It's NATO standards, it can provide security guarantees, and that could be a stepping stone to joining NATO in the longer term.
Well, I saw overnight that, in fact, Germany have now voiced the fear that if Ukraine does become part of NATO, that this will mean that, as far as Putin is concerned, he sees himself at war with NATO, and therefore the whole thing could actually escalate even further. Do you go along with that line of thought?
I don't. From the very start of this invasion in Ukraine, we've been spooked by the rhetoric that's come out of the Kremlin. It's taken us a while to gain the political courage, if you like, to provide those NLAWs, main battle tanks. And it's been Britain that's led the way, I have to say. We've actually done more than other nations. They've played catch up with us. Imagine how much further down the line we would be in flushing Russia out of Ukraine had we not been so hesitant at the very, very start indeed. Of course, you need to be conscious of what's called the escalatory ladder. You're dealing with a nuclear country and so forth. But ultimately, let's make it clear. This is Russia has invaded another state. This is, bear in mind also, Russia is a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. They're supposed to be the custodians of international security. And yet we see them here invade another country. It's very important that we understand this isn't just about Russia and Ukraine. This is about a geopolitical change, Russia returning to type in wanting to expand its influence over Eastern Europe. That requires all countries, not just Ukraine and Poland and so forth, to increase their investment in our armed forces. Our armed forces, including Britain's, are far too small given the headache, the problems, the challenges that we're going to encounter over the next decade.
Tobias, I heard an interview with a former senior army officer on Saturday morning on radio. He was saying, and in fact, you just used the word courageous, we should be more courageous. He was saying that actually NATO needs to be a lot bolder than it has been, that if at the very beginning we had given Ukraine all of the armaments and the material and the support that it needed, this war would have been over much sooner than it is. And that now, because we've just been drip feeding, as it were, a few tanks here, a bit of armaments there, the promise of a few planes there, that Ukraine really is running short of ammunition, which is why Biden has agreed to send them these cluster bombs, which, as you will know, 120 countries in the world have declared are illegal, and certainly they've been condemned by all the human rights organisations. But do you agree that if we had been stronger in the way that we'd supported Ukraine up until now, it would not be necessary to use cluster bombs at all?
Yeah, I mean, you cover a number of important points there. Russia wants to drag this out, turn it into a frozen conflict, and then hopefully lead it up to when perhaps Trump might get re-elected, which might change the whole parameters of the United States' commitment here. But on the role of cluster munitions, Ukraine has done well to retain the moral high ground here, painting Russia absolutely as the aggressor. And the world, therefore, should help Ukraine, the victim in this case, in defending its sovereignty. And that's been reflected, in fact, by the number of countries that have lent in to join in the sanctions against Russia. My concern is that if we start to use cluster munitions, which don't just kill people on the battlefield today, but they loiter around for often many, many years later, affecting civilians, we will lose that moral high ground. And that could easily see this international coalition of support for Ukraine start to crumble away, because many people will be deeply concerned that we're using munitions which have been outlawed. There are conventions against this, and I really don't think it's the direction we should be going. I hope that we'll reconsider and find other ways of providing the necessary support to Ukraine.
Yeah, but rather than perhaps, as you say, turning people against supporting Ukraine in this, is it not possible that because America, who will be providing this ammunition, has decided to do this, that if there is enough opposition to it, that in fact it will galvanise the rest of the allies into saying, well, you can't have the cluster bombs, therefore we will let you have the planes, we will let you have more ammunition, that it could have the reverse effect?
Yeah, I mean, let's just place into context. I mean, Ukraine has done a phenomenal job in holding back the third largest army in the world. But to move from defense to offense requires a whole range of equipment, which they currently don't have enough of. But they want to make the advance. They want the counteroffensive to start, and they want to push Russia back. It is imperative the West then gives them, absolutely, as you're saying, the necessary aeroplanes, the F-16s, the tanks, and the long-range missiles. You know, America has not provided the equivalent of Storm Shadow, what Britain has provided. That could be a much, much better alternative than actually flooding the country with cluster weapons, which, as I say, have a habit of, you know, deadly ordnance that lay on the battlefield long after the war is over, often killing so many civilians, indeed children, because they're the ones that wander around into the countryside and bump into these things. We've seen that in Africa. We've seen that in other, war-torn parts of the world. I strongly recommend that we do not use cluster munitions.
Tobias, I do want finally to ask you about the situation regarding Ben Wallace. We know that Biden has actually blocked the appointment of Ben Wallace as Secretary-General of NATO. Stoltenberg has another year to go before he has to leave. And the suggestion is that Ursula von der Leyen from the EU is the person who's going to take over. She has a very poor reputation as being actually not very competent in that role. So what on earth makes anybody think that she would be competent in that very important military role as Secretary-General of NATO?
If I can answer it this way, I mean, I spend much of my time from looking at the military situation, looking at these discussions and reading what's going on behind the scenes as chair of the Defense Committee. I'm not sure it's just President Biden that's involved in this decision. There are many others as well. From the EU perspective, many of the EU countries who are now doing ever more security-engaged commitments, including in Ukraine, their collective thought is that they would prefer to have their candidate also a member of the EU as well. In my view, Ben Wallace never stood a chance. Nothing to do with him at all. Yeah. He's done an incredible job in Ukraine. This was more about the EU countries for which Joe Biden has a lot of time for, saying, we need the person that leads NATO to be representing the same country that's also round the table when the EU discusses security matters as well.
Yeah, I've heard other reasons why Mr. Biden may have decided to oppose that appointment as well, but we won't go into them now. But Tobias Ellwood, thank you very much indeed for joining us. And I must apologise that we were hoping that Lord David Owen, the former Foreign Secretary, was going to be joining us. But we live in a technical world these days, and I'm afraid the technical gods were not with us and we were not able to make that link. So apologies for that. Now, in just a few minutes, I'm hoping that the gods will be with us because David Starkey is joining me to explain the significance of what some people are calling King Charles's second coronation up in Scotland. So stay with us.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. Well, further showers and longer spells of rain over the next few days. There will be some sunshine though, but for many of us it will feel fresher. And the reason for this is this area of low pressure. It's been around over the last few days, just sat to the west of us, but over the coming few days it actually spreads towards us and increases the risk of showers and longer spells of rain even more. This evening we do have thundery showers across the UK, but they will start to fade away, and then most places overnight we'll see clear skies, though towards the early hours we could see some showers moving back into southwestern parts of the UK. Temperatures generally the low to mid-teens, so a little fresher than recent nights, but still quite warm for the time of year. Monday morning gets off to a dry start for many, plenty of sunny spells, though the cloud quickly thickens from the southwest. This area of rain pushes northeastwards through the day, turning heavy at times, particularly across Wales into the Midlands, northwest England too. Elsewhere we'll see a mixture of sunny spells and scattered showers, and the best of the sunshine towards the southeast. We could see highs around 24 or 25 Celsius. Elsewhere generally the high teens to low 20s. That area of rain across North Wales, northern England, continues to push further north as we head through the evening, and then further spells of rain push into southern parts of the UK as we move into the early hours. This could be heavy at times, so overnight a lot of cloud around outbreaks of rain, and that will keep temperatures up generally a little higher, 14 to 17 degrees across much of the country. So it means a cloudy, wet start for many Tuesday morning, heavy showers already, but it should brighten up as we move through the morning into the afternoon, but that will trigger a few heavy showers too. Over the next few days, it remains unsettled as that low pressure stays in charge. Further showers and longer spells of rain and temperatures around average.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Welcome back. Well, there were some great photographs this week in all the national press of King Charles being presented with the crown jewels of Scotland at a service of thanksgiving in Edinburgh. Now, the event took place in St Giles Cathedral after a procession right up the Royal Mile, where a large number of anti-monarchy protesters made their voices heard, as well as thousands of supporters and well-wishers. Well, it's been dubbed by some as his second coronation, though, as I'm sure our guests will tell us, that isn't quite right. Our first guest is historian David Starkey, and I'm sure that someone who might have an entirely different take on the ceremony is the former Scottish Nationalist councillor Austin Sheridan, who is down the line with us from Glasgow. But David, I'd like to start with you. Will you just give us the background on the history of this regalia?
What it is, Scotland actually managed to keep not so much its medieval regalia, we don't know what that was, but the regalia of the Renaissance. This is mainly stuff given by the popes in the late 15th, early 16th century to the Scottish monarchy. And whereas all the wonderful, much more lavish, because it was a much richer monarchy, crown jewel and a much more elaborate coronation ceremony with consecration, whereas all that of England was totally destroyed by Oliver Cromwell in the Puritan Revolution of the 17th century, the Scots managed to keep this stuff from Cromwell. So it was kept safe and it was rediscovered, and it has this, as I'm sure, gentlemen, as it were, sitting beside me on air, as it were, in the ether will say, it becomes a fundamental symbol of Scottish sovereignty, of Scottish separateness.
And yes, and I think what was interesting, Austin, is that King Charles did not say that he was giving his pledge to the country, Scotland, but he was giving it to the people of Scotland. It was a rather sort of subtle change of language, wasn't it? Did that make people like you, who is someone who is very much in favour of Scotland becoming independent, a little bit happier with what was going on in the cathedral?
Well, it reasserts that the people of Scotland are sovereign, and that's historically always been the case. In terms of the ceremony, I'm not going to lie, I didn't see or watch much of it at all. I caught some clippings of it from the news, and generally that's how it went in Scotland. Absolutely, there were large protests there against it. There were a large number of supporters there supporting it, but the reality is that the general population of Scotland, a lot of it kind of went unnoticed. But even for the main coronation, I mean, I actually spent my time during the main coronation down south, where there were a lot more street parties, where there was lots of Union flag bunting put up. Those kind of celebrations, although be it there were some in Scotland, just weren't as prevalent, and that's that's always been the case. Really, I think that the number of it is that Queen Elizabeth II had great admiration in Scotland. And I believe that if Scotland were an independent country that chose to become independent in 2014, Scotland would now be looking at whether we were going to retain the monarchy or not. I think that would be the position we would be in just now if we were independent.
Yeah, David, can you just explain to me why it is that I know that in the coronation, when King Charles was crowned just a few weeks ago, we used all that amazing regalia that was all redone in 1661, wasn't it, by Charles II, I think. Why it is, if it is the coronation for the King of the United Kingdom, not just of England, why the coronation did not include using the crown of Scotland just to seal that, as it were? Why did we not use both sets of regalia?
Well, once upon a time, we actually did. We used the most important bit of the regalia of Scotland, the one that does allegedly survive from the Middle Ages, the Stone of Scone, which was actually placed by Edward I after he very narrowly failed to conquer Scotland. It was placed under the coronation chair, symbolically. And of course, actually on Edward's tomb, which is right by the coronation place in the Abbey, is inscribed the words Malleus Scotorum, the hammer of the Scots. But I think what's important, let me just pick up the point you made, very interestingly, about the pledge to the people of Scotland. The Scottish monarchy was the historic separate monarchy of Scotland was historically very different from the English monarchy. The Scottish monarchy, actually, you weren't called King of Scotland. You were called King of the Scots. And what we see in the ceremony is a nod to that. I think there's also something else we need to register, which is the extraordinary importance of union. Now, again, the gentleman sitting next to me on the air clearly dislikes union. The important thing to understand is that Scotland thrived in union. Scotland became modern in union. Scotland became a great imperial power because it was the dominant, in many ways, the dominant administrative, military, medical, financial element in the British Empire. And right through the 18th century, these honours of Scotland, that gentleman is making so much fuss about, and indeed the king made so much fuss about, sat completely neglected in a chest in Edinburgh Castle because nobody gave, dare I use the word, a toss before the
I'm sure that's not true, David.
Nobody gave a damn about the thing. And
well,
then
I think the Scottish people certainly do give a damn about them. And rather
no, Angela,
David,
let me finish.
I'm going to have to stop you there because sadly we're going to have to go to the news. David. I'm so sorry. I'm going to have to stop you because we're getting to the news now. Sadly, I'm sure we could go on talking about this for so much longer. But let's just remember that, yes, Her Majesty, the late Her Majesty the Queen, had very strong connections with Scotland. And I think King Charles similarly has them, apart from the properties that he has in Scotland. I think he always wears the kilt when he comes to Scotland. And I think he probably still has very, very strong feeling for the people of Scotland. David and Austin, thank you both very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
In a few minutes, we're going to be talking Wimbledon with award-winning tennis coach Zach Evenden. But before that, here are your latest news headlines with Rory Smith.
Thank you very much, Angela. The Culture Secretary will speak to the BBC's Director General later over what's been described as deeply concerning allegations, claiming a presenter paid a teenager tens of thousands of pounds for explicit images. The young person's mother has told The Sun she saw a photo of the man in his underwear on her child's phone, which looked like it was taken from a video call. MPs are calling for a full and transparent investigation. The broadcaster says it treats any allegation seriously. The Home Office says the number of people risking their lives by crossing the channel on small boats is unacceptable. It's after more than 1,000 people arrived over the past 2 days. GB News also understands more than 200 people have been intercepted just this morning. It brings this year's total to 12,700. Britain is preparing to host the US president. He's due to arrive this evening. Joe Biden will meet the King at Windsor Castle tomorrow. Then he'll hold talks with the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, where he's expected to raise concerns over Brexit. America's decision to send cluster munitions to Ukraine could also be discussed. Well, Joe Biden's visit comes ahead of the NATO summit in Lithuania, where the Prime Minister will urge allies to bolster their defence spending. Speaking in Vilnius on Tuesday, Rishi Sunak is expected to say we're seeing unprecedented security challenges. The UK remains one of the few NATO members meeting the alliance's requirement to spend at least 2% of national income on defence. That's the latest, but you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website. That is gbnews.com. Now, though, it's back to Angela.
Thanks very much indeed, Rory. Well, we've seen what Just Stop Oil have been up to already this weekend, and there could be more, as there are fears that they're going to seek to disrupt the British Grand Prix at Silverstone. Well, Theo Chikomba is there, and he joins us live. Theo, we understand there's pretty major security in place to stop any disruption, as there was last year. What's actually happening?
There is indeed. Well, you might have just missed just a few seconds ago, police going past here. There's patrols going through the village of Silverstone and, of course, in and around the track as well. Around 8 miles of the track has been circled by police throughout the day. 140,000 fans are expected to come and watch the British Grand Prix, which starts at around 3 o'clock this afternoon. Tens of thousands of people have already been making their way since the early hours of this morning, and across the weekend. Events started on Friday. They're expecting around 400,000 fans to come and watch the events taking place here. But of course, protesters have been a concern for the police in Northamptonshire. Police say there are chief constables, there are police officers patrolling around this area. There's some on bikes, some in plainclothes, and some just in normal cars who you'll see in this area. But plenty of security and extra checks are being made as well for those who are entering into the Silverstone area, racing area as well. But plenty of people are excited this afternoon, and they're hoping there'll be no disruptions.
Yeah, I think we probably all are, Theo. Thank you very much indeed for that. I mean, throwing orange confetti at George Osborne is one thing, and dropping bits of jigsaw over the Wimbledon court is another, but mucking about with Formula One racing, that's a pretty dangerous prospect, isn't it? So, Theo, thank you very much indeed for that. Thank you. Well, we're going to stick with sport because Wimbledon is indeed coming now into its second week. The tournament sparks a huge surge of interest every year in tennis, apparently with children who then start pestering their parents for rackets after seeing the exploits of players like Andy Murray, who fought to the end yesterday before losing to Stefanos Tsitsipas in a 5-set thriller. But do we do enough to keep those young people interested once the tournament ends? Well, someone who's experienced that firsthand is the award-winning tennis coach Zach Evenden, who joins me on the line now. And Zach, I think we had 14 British players at the start of Wimbledon, and all the big names like Dan Evans, like Andy Murray, as we say, who went out yesterday. They've all gone, haven't they? We don't know who's still there in the doubles, the mixed doubles, and indeed the wheelchair, but I think Alfie Hewitt is definitely going to be there. But what happens? How is it we cannot produce enough really good tennis players who can go through to the finals?
I mean, the finals, the level's getting better every year. So, the competition is getting real tough. But I think English tennis is in a very good place as a whole compared to previous years. So I think it's definitely doing well. Cam Norrie won Indian Wells Masters, which was, no one's done that since Murray. So I feel like it is in a good place, but in terms of, little kids, I definitely don't think there's enough resources for them.
Well, why aren't there enough resources? Because it's not as if the LTA, the Lawn Tennis Association, doesn't make millions every year out of things like Wimbledon. And they are supposed to be putting some of that back into the training facilities for younger people. So what is going wrong? What is the difference between the way we encourage youngsters to see tennis as a livelihood here in this country compared with what you see when you're working in America?
Compared to the States, there's no comparison, to be honest with you. Like park and recreational courts in the States is like the equivalent to like pro level courts, and you have floodlights as well, like for free, and you don't have to pay, and you can get that level of court with lights, so time isn't an issue once 8 p.m. hits. Whereas here, I tried to coach a boy who's a competitive ITF player, so he plays international tournaments, and we tried to find some local park courts in Wimbledon, and we found that all of them, or near enough all of them, were all under reconstruction or maintenance, so they were all actually shut down, and we couldn't even get a court. So even just that, not providing juniors or families with recreational park courts that they can just go and hop on, if they feel an itch to get out there and play, that's even that is a huge hit.
But is there, Zach, a problem with the image that tennis has? It's not exactly a cheap sport because, the tennis rackets don't come cheap. The equipment doesn't come cheap. You have to, most of the time, belong to a tennis club, and very often, actually, I belong to a couple of tennis clubs, but one of them down in Tavistock, which is perfect. And they do have a very, very sort of small amount to join every year compared with what you would pay for Hurlingham or for Queen's or any of the big places. But does it have a bad image that people see it very much as an elite sport? And if so, what can we do to break that down, to get kids who probably have amazing sporting potential but are never going to have the opportunity to put a tennis racket in their hands?
Yeah, and I think it, I completely agree with you. And I think it starts with that, just making it accessible, to the point where you don't have to put a membership on it. Like, why can't we just have rec courts with lights? That people can hop on for free, but that's not even going into the area you're talking about, which is, rackets costing, £200 a racket, tennis balls now are surging as well, so I think it starts with the basics. Let's just get people, or let's just allow people to be able to get on a court if they want to. I think that's the first problem, to be honest, which is just there isn't enough courts and resources like that that's just ready and able. You shouldn't have to go and join a whole tennis club just to go out there and hit some balls.
Yeah, but But does that raise the question that actually more money should be coming into the sport to enable kids who can't afford all of those things to be given the opportunity of doing it through support from the LTA?
Yeah, completely. And, you know, that's where it starts. It's getting the volume up of numbers, you know, and that's you know, one thing the States has no problem with is you know, their numbers are just, you know, you can't compete with it because, you know, there's park courts everywhere. If you take a drive down in, you know, Georgia or Florida, every mile or so you can find some park courts with lights. So it's you can't really compare it.
Yeah. So the interest is there, but not the infrastructure to support it. Zach, thanks very much indeed. And let's keep our fingers crossed that as the years go by, a lot more young tennis players will come through and make it into that top 50, top 10 tennis players in the world. Zach, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Now, in a few minutes, the co-founders of the LGB Alliance are going to be joining me after a legal attempt to remove their charitable status was thrown out of court. Welcome back. Now, the LGB Alliance was set up in 2019 to protect the rights of same-sex attracted people. The founders believed that gay rights were being eroded by an overemphasis on transgender issues. And indeed, it was the trans group Mermaids who took them to court last year to get their charitable status removed. But the case was thrown out of court just a few days ago when a tribunal ruled that Mermaids had no legal standing to bring the case. Well, I'm joined now by two two of the co-founders of the LGB Alliance, Kate Harris and Bev Jackson. Kate and Bev, I don't mind which one of you answers this, but, I mean, there was an awful lot of publicity given to this particular case to take away, as we say, your charitable status. But I suspect that actually underlying all of this, there was a toxic atmosphere between you. So just tell me to start with how this whole set of publicity has actually affected the work that you do when you are working with people who belong to the LGB community. Bev?
Well, I'm Kate. But
Kate, sorry, Kate.
No, we're interchangeable. We're interchangeable, don't worry. Yeah, it's quite there's lots of different answers to what you've just said. But first of all, can we say we're deliriously happy at the result? Mm-hmm. We think we've set the hairs running because, frankly, there was an extremely unpleasant atmosphere, despite our attempts for 3 years before we set up LGB Alliance to engage in respectful dialogue with Stonewall. Mm-hmm. My history is Stonewall. And over a 3-year period, we wrote and asked to just talk. Let's talk about the issues of sex and gender and how they affect homosexuals. We think, when I say we've set the hairs running, we think the era of no debate is over. Because for 8 years now, Stonewall and the cottage industry of TQIA plus groups.
It's become an alphabet, hasn't it?
It has.
Yes.
And don't forget, well, anyway, let's not go there. But we think that no debate is, as a mantra, is completely incompatible with being in a liberal democracy. And all we've asked for all along is not that our views should prevail, but that we should allow a plurality of thought.
So let me just say what exactly is the difference, perhaps, between LGB Alliance and all the many, I think I can say hundreds of groups which call themselves LGBTQIA+. The difference is that LGBT people are simply people who are attracted to others of the same sex.
Yes.
That's it. Yes. It's a very simple...
So you're homosexual or you're lesbian?
Or bisexual,
or
indeed.
bisexual.
Yes, and that's it. And we don't share any particular beliefs or any particular political persuasion. It's across the political spectrum and so on. The other groups that call themselves LGBTQIA+, and whatever, are in fact not LGBT. What they have in common is a belief. They believe that everyone has a gender identity. And moreover, they believe that gender identity is more important than sex. So if you follow that to its logical extreme, two men who both consider themselves identify as women can be a lesbian couple. We say that is not only absurd, but also quite offensive to actual lesbians.
So, I mean, you were actually set up to protect the rights of the LGB community.
Yeah.
How has all of this affected the work that you actually do at ground level, as it were? Because you have so many different projects underway, don't you?
Yes.
How has that been affected?
Well, it's interesting. We started, as you said, in 2019. We started very quickly and unexpectedly. We had no idea what was going to happen. We became a limited company. We realised we should be a charity. And within 14 months of setting up, we were a charity. But from the beginning, we were very structured and organised. In fact, we modelled ourselves on the best of what Stonewall used to be. Mm-hmm. As I said, my background is Stonewall, Bev's is Gay Liberation Front. So we had a business plan 3.5 years ago, and the top project that we wanted to set up was a helpline, for an LGB helpline for confused young people. Now, our focus has always been on children because I know from primary school days, Mr. Higgins was my teacher. I was 9, and at PE, he'd divide the class. Boys and Catherine Harris over there, girls over there. Because I was athletic. I was the best in the form at football and cricket. So I went off with the boys. Now, today, a very well-meaning teacher would take me to one side and say, you know, Catherine, there is such a thing as a gender identity. Did you ever think you might be born in the wrong body? And I guarantee, I mean, I was a very vulnerable child. I would have jumped at the attention. I would have gone for the testosterone, the puberty blockers, the double mastectomy. And one of the things that drives all of us is that we cannot bear that there are no voices out there saying, being a lesbian is fantastic, being gay is fantastic.
And we're back to I mean, just tell us, Bev, how you feel about this too, because clearly that, you know, there is this underlying toxicity, isn't there, between the two communities now?
Well, I'm not sure even that community is perhaps, I'm not sure it's the right word, but I just remember the 1970s. When I set up, I was one of the founding members of Gay Liberation Front at LSE in 1970. And it was really important, we emphasised at the beginning of Gay Liberation that gay liberation went hand in hand with women's liberation. We were fighting sexism in society. And there was a lot of sexism. And if you were a lesbian in the 1970s, as I was, I came out very early, you would hear from men, jokes, it was a joke. It's still, unfortunately, in many circles, a joke. And men would say, I feel like a lesbian inside. It was a horrible joke. It really wasn't funny then. And now, men are saying that they feel like lesbians inside, and they are supposed to be taken seriously. And lesbians who say, sorry, but no, if you were born male, you can't be a lesbian, are called bigots and even, by Stonewall, sexual racists.
Is there ever going to come a point where you're going to find that you are in the same place, that you've got mutual ground here where you can talk to each other?
We have to.
We must,
have to. There is no choice. And this is what we've always said. We live in a liberal democracy. We're proud of the values of the Enlightenment. And the only way forward is dialogue and finding common ground. But we have been so badly slandered and defamed.
And you believe that is slander and defamation?
We have constantly, yes. And we are virtually unheard. Thank you for having us on. Other channels do not have us on. Our adverts have been banned from newspapers. Our voice has constantly been silenced. So to anybody who's new to this, I would say, please look at our website, LGB Alliance's website. Please look at our YouTube channel. We can only get our message out through social media, and our message is about dialogue, facts, respectful debate, and above all, prioritising truth to children, because we're going through an extraordinary phase in history where black is white. The opposite of what you see is the reality.
Yesterday, there was a very large demonstration in London, which was actually about not LGB rights, but trans rights. Now, that community, who do believe that it is possible for a man to become a woman and vice versa, they have rights too, don't they? So if you're going to protect the rights of bisexual, lesbians and homosexuals, who is going to protect the rights of the transgender community?
We have always supported the rights of trans people, and in fact many people support us and are appalled by the vile actions and misogynist actions of some of the people who claim to speak for transgender people. Transgender people have every right to be free from discrimination, for instance, in public services and so on. And if I saw a trans person being harassed in the street, I would be the first person to leap to their defence, because I will not stand for it. I have supported minorities all my life, and I will not stand for it. But when you hear people say trans rights are human rights, we all believe that. What they mean is people have the right to just say what sex they are. That is what they mean. That is what trans rights or human rights mean. It means people have the right to say whether they're male or female. And we don't believe that. We don't believe you have the right to say whether you're male or female. We do believe there are two sexes. In fact, that isn't really a belief. It is a fact. People are born male or female.
You say you need dialogue. What is it going to take to get that dialogue started and to get it actually to continue on a pleasant platform, let me put it that way, rather than a toxic one?
It's a really good question, and I think the judgment is a really good starting point. And the tribunal have written, and the Charity Commission said this at the beginning, a sign of a healthy democracy and how you move forward is debate. And that is the only way forward. We need to be allowed to take part. And up until now, as I said, the mantra overwhelmingly has been no debate. That period is well and truly over.
It was very interesting. If I could just say one more thing.
Very briefly.
Yes. The Charity Commission lawyer said at the trial, in this very non-collaborative way, in fact, Mermaids and LGB Alliance are collaborating to produce the dialogue that you say we should have.
That should be the key to get them to do it. Thank you both, Kate and Bev, very much indeed for joining us. And that's it for the programme. Michael will be back next week. And in a few minutes, Emily Carver will be taking over. But from me, Angela Rippon, enjoy the rest of your weekend. Goodbye for now.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. Well, further showers and longer spells of rain over the next few days. There will be some sunshine though, but for many of us it will feel fresher. And the reason for this is this area of low pressure. It's been around over the last few days, just sat to the west of us, but over the coming few days it actually spreads towards us and increases the risk of showers and longer spells of rain even more. This evening we do have thundery showers across the UK, but they will start to fade away, and then most places overnight we'll see clear skies, though towards the early hours we could see some showers moving back into southwestern parts of the UK. Temperatures generally